Well, if you've ever wanted to flex your vocal muscles to this song,
I would like a ring, I would like a ring, I would like a diamond ring on my wedding finger. I would like a big and shiny diamond.
you've come to the right place. Hi guys, Damien here again. Well, if you've ever wanted to flex your vocal muscles to this song, you've come to the right place. I was first put onto this song, like probably a lot of people out there were, because of a reel that I found on Instagram.
I would like a ring, I would like a ring, I would like a diamond ring on my wedding finger. I would like a big and shiny diamond. I
was just blown away, like, my God, the lung power of doing something so crazy, just nuts. And so, not knowing what the song title was and the artist, I did a little bit of scouring, and sure enough, I saw RAYE's Where's My Husband on the charts, and I hadn't even heard the song yet, so I thought, okay, get on Apple Music, have a listen, and sure enough, there's the song, and in the middle of it comes that I would like a ring section. There's a lot of Crazy in Love by Beyonce in the horns and the drum groove, but it's a really cool song. And I must say, the melody guide in the MIDI file, which is the track that I always have to put the vocal line on, was a tricky one to master, and for that I had to drop the tempo down quite considerably to play it in, because it's like da 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 da. So I couldn't play it at full speed, so I dropped it down. From memory, I think the song's about 116 BPM, and I dropped it down to 95 BPM and played the line in, and then I pulled it back up to 116 BPM, and it sounded great. And then when it came time to synchronize the lyrics to the MIDI file, that took a fair bit of time too. And luckily, with this app that I use on my Mac called midi, I was able to slow the tempo down on that as well. So I'm actually going to show you midi before I go into the Logic session, and you'll see the process involved in having to synchronize the lyrics to the MIDI file. So without further delay, let's get into it. Okay, so this is the MIDI file for Where's My Husband in midi, which is the app that I use for synchronizing all the lyrics to the MIDI for karaoke purposes. Now, to give you a little bit of history on this, I started doing all of this stuff back in 2006, so a good 20 years ago, would you believe? And back in those days, I had to use Sonar on a PC running Windows XP. When I heard that I had to use Sonar on a PC, I was like, no way, because obviously I was using the Mac and I was 3 years deep into using a Mac to make music with. So luckily John had an old PC tower lying around, so I got that off of him, and I also bought myself a switcher. That switcher connected to both computers, and I could run one monitor, mouse, and keyboard off of the switcher, and if I pressed a button on the switcher, it would switch between the two computers. And so there's two different types of synchronization when it comes to lyrics. There's one which is synchronizing right to each syllable of each word. And so for that, I would have to hyphenate words. And then the second one is a line by line synchronization. So I'll explain that when I get to talk about this app that I'm using now, midi. So with Sonar, I had to bring the lyrics in and I had to synchronize it to the channel 4 track, which is always the vocal guide. So Sonar had an auto hyphenate button, which I could press and it would hyphenate most of the words, but there would still be some that weren't hyphenated and I'd have to do it myself, which was a real pain. And then to top it all off, you had to hyphenate any melismas, which are multiple notes using the same syllable in a word. So, for example, with Where's My Husband, in the chorus, there's that to find me. And back in those days, I would have to hyphenate me hyphen e hyphen e. It would be a tricky one when there's a song that has a lot of melismas in it. So that was hard work. And obviously, it took a long time to synchronize the lyrics to a song. But these days, ever since the mid 10s, I think thereabouts, John introduced me to this app on the Mac called midi. And with this app, it works a bit differently than Sonar because it's not a MIDI sequencing and audio app like Sonar is. It's purely a MIDI file playback app that has the ability to synchronize karaoke lyrics. But with this app, it works with line by line synchronization. So this is showing you each line of lyrics. And so what I would have to do is make sure that this button here, the smiley face button, was selected. And then what I do is just tap on the first line of lyrics. And then when it went on to the next line, I just hit enter, then hit enter, hit enter, hit enter, etc. until the full song's done. So this kind of synchronization shaves a lot of time off when it comes to synchronizing lyrics. This song was a very challenging one when it came to synchronizing lyrics because the song is going so quickly and the vocals are kind of like rap singing, but the note choices are very crazy and very quirky. One thing that I also want to show you here too is what this would sound like if you were playing it through some kind of a GM sound module. So obviously it's very different from the MP3 mix. So here it is again. Etc. etc. So yes, so obviously I try to make my MP3 mixes a bit more livelier, just make it feel as close as I can to the original record. But that's a little glimpse of what it would sound like through a GM sound module. Now the Merish modules that are out these days are much better as far as sound quality, whereas the sound that's coming out of this MIDI file through midi is probably close to what it would sound like out of the old Sound Canvas, which was the first ever general MIDI sound module to be released back in the early 90s. So there you go. That is how it all works with the synchronization side of things. Let's get into the session. All right, so here is the session for Where's My Husband? I'll show you the verse section because this is where I obviously, when I first heard the song, I was immediately reminded of Crazy in Love by Beyonce with its horn stabs every odd numbered bar. I'll just find the spot where it is. Yeah, so that's a strong influence in that song. I'm going to go one by one down the tracks as I usually do. So the first track here is the piano, and this only really gets used. Let me just check. Oh, yeah, no, it gets used in the pre chorus and the chorus. So for this, I'm using the wing upright. Oh, no, I'm using Gentleman, which is one of the piano libraries in Native Instruments Contact. I have I use this and the wing upright in Keyscape depending on the kind of sound I'm going for. So in this case, because I wanted something bright, I thought the Gentleman was a good choice for that matter. So here's the piano by itself. It's all just octaves like that during the chorus. So then we've got the bass. So for this, I'm using the Easy Bass plugin, which I've used a few times before. And I'm using the Easy Bass Modern with the Focused and Warm preset on there. So here's how that sounds. I'll play in the pre-chorus because that's where it gets the most funkiest, I think. I love how the scripting in this plugin is very much like what Native Instruments does in their bass and guitar libraries with the automatic legato detection. So that's fabulous. So next thing is the Hammond that gets used all the way through the song, and it doubles up the horn stabs in the verse. But a good example again is in the pre-chorus. As you can hear there, I use the sustain pedal to bring in the Leslie effect. Obviously, I can't do this kind of effect with the organs in the GM world, so that makes it even more authentic. All right, so next is the voice ooze, and you can pretty much guess where these guys get used the most. So this is with the Reality Vox Ladies library. I've used a ton of times, and you've seen it in previous videos, but you pretty much know what this is going to do.
Ooh, 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 ooh.
So then I've got a track stack with all the horns. So trumpet, trumpet, alto sax, trombone, and baritone sax. So what I think we'll do is we will solo everything together, and let's listen to the chorus. So as you can hear there, I used the controller on my keyboard to record in expression controller events to do the sforzando at the end. But yeah, not the best horn plugins out there by a long shot. So I'll unsolo that. So now we'll do the drums a bit later, but what do we got here? Okay, so we've got the strings. I'm using Session Strings Pro 2, which I've used a lot before in many other tracks. So best place to show you again is the pre-chorus. And also the chorus. Okay. The timpani make an appearance. So good place to show that is here in the chorus. Okay, so now we're onto the drums. So we've got a drum track using Superior Driver 3 and the Dry Funk kit, which I've used a ton, and that Latin percussion library, which I've also used a lot. So they both make an appearance here. So a good spot actually is with the percussion. The second verse is where the percussion really kicks in, and there's congas and bongos all the way down the track from there on. So that's, here we go. In fact, okay. All right, I'm going to play the outro that's got everything there in all its glory, and that will be it. Okay, so that is where is my husband? It goes without saying that if you're going to learn this song, if you've got a way of playing the song at a slower tempo, whether it's the MP3 mix or the MIDI file, then please do, because it needs to be practiced at a slower tempo and then just slowly bringing it up to its actual speed. Anyway, that's it. Please like and subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in the next go round.